Now, next we've got a really interesting one. So, we're doing it. I imagine there's a few people sort of here for this, and welcome if you're joining us, because we think we're going to put this on the Analysing Avatar feed.
Yes.
So, welcome to a little bonus thing for Analysing Avatar.
Yeah, this
which
is
literally being pulled out of.
Yeah,
Nothing But Static.
I was going to say that, but you got there before me. Yes, this is Nothing But Static, and we're maybe pulling this segment out and sticking it on the feed of our other podcast because people are going to want to know what we think of The Last Airbender on Netflix.
Well, the interesting thing for me is Dan sends me a voice note, and Dan frames it as this. Dan's like, we're recording on Saturday, show's coming out on Thursday. So let's do a first impressions review. Let's watch as much as we can, watch a few episodes, and do a review of like our first impressions. We might not be able to do a full review because we haven't seen it all, and maybe we'll come back to it at a later stage. Anyway, because of Analysing Avatar, you never know, when we finish Korra, we might do this episode by episode. So let's watch a few, watch as many as we can, and do a first impressions review. I'm fascinated to ask Dan, because I have a suspicion. How many episodes of the show have you watched?
5.
You what? Sorry,
5.
5.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I was sure you'd have watched all of it. I was convinced that you'd have watched all of it, and we'd be doing first impressions on a show that you'd seen all of.
No, I didn't have time. I'm watching it with Nadia. That always puts a limit on how much time do we have specifically together. But yeah, we managed to watch. I think we watched 2 on the first night, 3 on the second night, and then we haven't watched any so far today.
Okay, nice.
So yeah, I've seen 5. How many have you seen?
I've seen 7 because I was sure you'd have watched all of it.
Look at you! Well done. Oh, you can answer some questions.
I stayed
for
up.
Me, then.
I stayed up very late because I was like, I'm sure he's going to have watched all of it, and I wanted to do a bit where you were like, my suspicion was that you'd be like, I've watched all of it. Yeah, sorry. And then I wanted to be able to go. I wanted to be able to go. Oh yeah, I've seen it all as well. But it got to got to 2 a.m. and I started doing the maths of when I'd have to get up, and I was like, I'm only going to get 4 hours sleep at most now. I can't watch this one. I'll be a zombie tomorrow because I haven't had much sleep all week. So I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, no, it's funny. And no need to apologise. It's all my undo.
Yeah, because I was going to say I did the thing I said we'd do. Right?
Yeah. I was just sure you wouldn't.
You were having a race against a fictional Dan that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I knew that was a risk. I knew that was a risk. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And like I say, I probably still would have. Maybe. I mean, the reality is I've only seen 2 more than you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I reckon you'd stopped at 6 otherwise if you weren't pushing. Maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah, because just thinking about it, it's very easy to go, I've only seen 2 more than you, but those 2 more probably did make the difference between a decent night's sleep and fuck all sleep. So yeah. very much my own fault. Yeah. But having said that, Dan, what are your... I'm more intrigued about your thoughts here than mine, because I'm in an interesting position where I've only watched the original once. So, obviously, episode 3 in particular, I'm like, oh, you're doing all the plots in this episode. Yeah. But there's some things where I don't have as much recall or memory as you do. So I'm very intrigued for you to start this discussion and see what you thought.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll do a little caveat first of we're going to do sort of spoilery discussion here. I'll do a vague overall thoughts first, but I think we're pretty quickly going to go into the nitty gritty on this one. And I think that if you've not seen this series yet, but you're interested, I'm going to go ahead and just do a generic look, this is not as bad as you feared, but it's also not as good as it could have been. That's my headline. There are many missed opportunities or strange decisions along the way. But I'll tell you now, if you've read any of these, and I've seen a handful now, these mad internet tantrums about things not being the same as the cartoon, and how no one who worked on this show gave a shit. It's just for money. I don't think you've watched the show properly, if that is what you think. I think they put a lot of love and a lot of care into this, and not every decision they made functions, and we'll get into why. The show has many legitimate flaws. If you wanted to come away and have a discussion about what didn't work about the show, there is plenty of stuff you could say to me that you didn't like about the show and made you not like it, and I would go, thumbs up. Yeah, totally respect that. But just not the same as previous thing is a very dumb argument to make, in my opinion. This doesn't work like this in the original show. They got it wrong. No, they've created new rules for their universe because they're making choices for themselves, because they're writers that have creative freedom and wanted to tell the story their way. And they made changes. I don't like all of the changes. I never would. But I'll tell you this, like, it's a bunch of fun, and they clearly cared a lot about honouring the show. And I think anyone who thinks differently, when it makes references to Mrs. Wu and the volcano, and the fighting off the canyon crawlers in the Great Divide, and, you know, Aang and the gang going off and fighting pirates, when it's making references to all that stuff, this was made by someone who gives a shit. And whether that was Netflix's reason for giving them the money to make it or not, that's a different discussion, because that was probably monetary, straight after the success of that sort of 2020 summer of Avatar, where, you know, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but for listeners who are joining us on Analysing Avatar, it went and hit Netflix during a time we were all locked in our houses, and Avatar had a bit of a resurgence, the animated version. It wasn't long after Netflix announced this.
Dan was, you know, behind the scenes. Dan was so grumpy, man, because we'd made references to our one day after Steven Universe we'll do Avatar, and then Avatar was this big thing, and Dan was just like, "Well, we basically missed it, haven't we? Like, there's had a resurgence, and we should have done this last year, and now we're only just." Dan was so grumpy about Avatar's renewed success.
The timing of it, yeah, it was poor. So. You can talk about the cynicism behind this all you like, and if you've seen comments like that online, please do not let them put you off. I think this show is, if we're just doing overall start, I think the show is really fun. An interesting new take on the franchise. Is it the definitive one? No, that's that cartoon that came out a few years back. But if you're willing to just accept that they're making different creative choices and engage with what it is they are doing, again, not all of it will work, but there's a ton of fun to be had here. And I, on the whole, would say I enjoyed it. But I'll go back to my headline review of not as bad as you feared, but also not as good as it could have been. I would highlight some potential missed opportunity with this. So yeah, that's my overall review. How did you feel generally, Chris, before we get into the nitty-gritty?
You know what? I was surprised at how excited I was because it's always been like, oh yeah, that's happening, might be good, might be shit. But when it actually came out, I was really excited to sit down and watch it.
Like, yeah, me too. I was also a bit surprised by that.
I was really hyped. I was like, oh fuck yeah! Like, and Jess has been away, so I think she probably would have watched it with me if she was here, but it would have been that is the other reason I've got through 7 episodes, because she wasn't here to either want to watch something else or tell me to go to bed. But so
I know Jess occasionally listens to this podcast. I don't think these days as much, but if Jess, you're hearing this, he's just told on himself there. Give him a clip round the ear for staying up too late.
Oh, mate, she literally the other day, I was in the bathroom at like 1 a.m. and I just heard her go, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm cleaning my teeth." And she was like, "I thought you were getting an early night tonight." And I was like, "Yeah, that didn't happen." But anyway, so yeah, I literally got told off. I sit down and I'm really excited, and I'm gonna go a step beyond what you said about people saying about the changes. I think some of them make a lot of sense.
Yep.
And some of them were done very cleverly. And I think logically. And I think that actually, I haven't seen the last episode, but a lot of the list Like, I don't want to spoil things. We'll spoil things in a sec. But a lot of the list of like, oh, I want to see this thing, it's getting ticked off. And actually, a lot of the, oh, I want to see them do different things with the bending, ticked off. You know, and a lot of character development. Some of the characters, to give a kind of criticism I can give non-spoilery, I think some of the character development of the, surprisingly, considering that the animation is, 22 minutes, although over the span of the season they've obviously got more time, I think some of the character development of Aang in particular is way less subtle in this show.
Oh no! I think everything about this show is way less subtle. Look, if we're gonna do a criticism, like, this is the most on the nose show. I think that is a criticism. If someone said, is one of those things I mentioned earlier, that if someone had that problem with the show, yeah, everything is on Front Street. Everyone is just saying how they feel. Like, the show is about as subtle as a punch to the face.
The dialogue in particular, and Aang, for some, it really jarred me with Aang, because Aang it's so subtly woven and done throughout the original that they just literally outright have Aang saying how he feels in this. I think some of the development of, and again, I think this can be said in a non-spoiler way, I think Sokka is, I've actually not, because all I could really see was stuff about Ken, our buddy Ken, thinking it was the Avatar movie. I've not seen a lot of and also when I could see stuff, I literally saw 4 article headlines. And two said it.
I've pulled up 6 article headlines with contrasting. Would you like me to quickly read these headlines for you to give you a sense of how mixed the reception
that's the point. Yeah, that's, I mean...
let me supply them, and then you can jump off that. So, USA Today, Avatar The Last Airbender review, Netflix gets it oh so wrong. Screen Rant, Avatar The Last Airbender review, Netflix impressive adaptation keeps the animation's best qualities. The Guardian, Avatar The Last Airbender review, a sparkling return for one of the greatest fantasy series of all time. Variety, The Last Airbender is a beautifully crafted disappointment. Screen Hub Australia, which I think probably came up with because of where I am when I searched this, but Avatar The Last Airbender, Netflix review, temper your expectations. And finally, Forbes, Avatar The Last Airbender review, much better than you thought it would be. So, to say the reviews have been a mixed bag is strong.
Yeah, and I basically experienced that. I saw a variety, at least 2 of them. I actually literally saw the Variety one. I particularly remember, because the Variety one makes you think it's going to be what the Variety put a twist in the headline. It was very impressive. It was very M. Night Shyamalan. That, like, beautifully crafted disappointment. So I saw 4 headlines. They all contradicted, and I went, fine. I won't go too deep into it. But I assume Sokka might have been a bit of a sticking point for some people, because they've made Sokka in particular is very uneven. The show manages to weave a really subtle and clever line between comic relief and kind of traumatized soldier in a way, and the way the original weaved that line was very clever. Here, it just feels incredibly inconsistent. Sometimes he's cracking jokes, not often enough, I would argue, especially in the first episode where it almost feels like a completely different character. But sometimes he's cracking jokes very occasionally, and sometimes he's a really kind of serious, soldier character. And I think they've handled Katara a lot better, I think, than they've handled Sokka, and maybe we'll talk about some of that more in a second.
Yeah, because I think there's a specific episode that really does something very interesting with Sokka, but like the key word is uneven. It's a little bit, what we talked about when we reviewed Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where like in that episode his character arc works really well, but then across the season you go, oh, I'm not sure all this gels together. The whole isn't quite coming together in the way an individual episode might work on its own merits.
Yeah. I think my headline would be it looks beautiful. The child acting I think is good, which obviously was a real contention for the the movie. I think the performances are strong. I think there's some real standout performances. Uncle Iroh is brilliant. So I think Daniel Day-Kim as the Fire Lord is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the guest stars, I don't want to spoil them, but the one that Dan and I are an easy mark for is fantastic.
Yep. So good.
Maybe we'll talk about that more in a second.
Yep.
But I think there's some really standout performances. It is visually stunning. Some decisions they made, I think, work. Some changes they made, I think, really work, and I understand completely why they did them. Some even the changes that don't work, I don't think it's necessarily that the changes don't work. I think just the execution of the idea, full stop. Some of them get a little bit convoluted. There were points in this show where I'm like, if I hadn't seen the original, I'm not sure I would understand what's happening here, especially as we get deeper into the series. I think they actually make a very specific change, which I think in episode 1 makes the story way more accessible. And again, a change that I imagine some people didn't like.
If it's the same change I'm thinking of, I actually disagree. I think they made that change in an attempt to make it more accessible, but I think they shot themselves in the foot and had the exact opposite effect. But we'll talk about that. Yeah, so I agree.
I think it's worth watching. I genuinely do. Whether you've seen the original show or not, I think it's worth watching. I don't think it's as good as One Piece, which is obviously a logical thing to compare it to.
Yes,
live action remake retelling of an animated show. But I think it's not bad by any means. Like it's good. I enjoy watching it, although in some ways we're probably the wrong people to judge, because one of the reasons I enjoy watching it is, hey, it's that thing, cool. So how that I would be very intrigued to speak to someone who'd never seen the original animated show.
I definitely get little bumps of nostalgia from it every so often that maybe paper over some of the cracks. But I will say that, like, I've tried to be as objective as I can watching this. And look, it's got weird pacing issues. There's some clunky on the nose dialogue. And there's a weird, heavy reliance on exposition dumps and characters explaining their feelings rather than demonstrating them. And if none of that sounds appealing to you, then maybe just bow out now, because those problems exist for sure. But let me say a controversial thing, Chris. I think this remake is no worse an adaptation of its source material than the Harry Potter films. It might even be a better adaptation of its source material than the Harry Potter films. The only difference...
Yeah, I think it's a better adaptation, but yeah, carry on.
The only difference is people saw those films as kids and have nostalgia for the films, not the source material. Because those movies are full of, let me think, weird pacing issues, odd story changes, clunky on-the-nose dialogue, heavy reliance on exposition dumps and characters explaining their feelings rather than demonstrating them. Hey, isn't that all the same stuff that's present in this show? So I genuinely find it really funny that people hail those Harry Potter films as like these brilliant adaptations of these books. They nailed it. They're a mess, and I think any objective viewing of them would reveal that. I genuinely feel that way. And while they start better than they end, I think the average quality across those movies, across all 7 of them, I think this clears that. Will that stay true across 3 seasons if they get it? Maybe not. Who knows? Who knows? But I'll tell you this, the first episode of this is its worst, in my opinion, and it only improves from there.
Yeah.
And I will get into why when we do a bit more spoilery stuff in a second. But I genuinely think the flaws that are in this show, and there are many, I've hinted at several. I just gave 3 or 4 clean examples of things this show does not do well. I still think this is a ton of fun. And I don't think, unless this show's existence has somehow accidentally deleted all your access to the original animated series, I don't see any reason to be mad about this show. No. I think there's a reason to maybe go, I didn't like it. But I saw someone so mad They posted rant after rant after rant on their social media and then posted them cancelling their Netflix because of it. I'm going to say this once. See a therapist, because that is not healthy. I have sometimes exaggerated anger on this podcast for like comic effect, essentially, where a show has done something so baffling to me creatively that I've gone, these idiots have done this or whatever. But the reality is, making TV shows is hard, and no one sits down to make a bad thing, right? No one wants to be bad at their job in any capacity, right? We all would like to be good at our jobs because people like to feel like we're achieving something with our days, right? No one who sat down to make these costumes, write these scripts, compose this music was looking to hurt you. And the implication they were says more about you than them.
But also, it's not hurt you. You can just choose not to watch it.
Just choose not to watch it. 100%. If the first episode goes by and you feel yourself going, this didn't work for me in any way, those problems I mentioned, clunky dialogue, exposition, all that stuff, if that stuff is really bothering you, hey, the show's not for you. It didn't work for you. That's a shame. This assumption that they were out to get you and upset you with a bad show that ruins your childhood is insane. Like, actually, like, please do seek help. Talk to a friend or find a therapist.
But especially when, like you say, like, it is taking, what, 20, 24, whatever, 20-minute episodes and condensing them into 8 48-minute episodes.
Right.
So that's all it's doing. It's not the show. The show is not suddenly about a different character. The show is not. It's not. It's not Avatar, but it's soccer. It's not. I don't want to spoil it, but it's not Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Like, the fundamentals on the show, despite what we've talked about, you know, some of the character development being on the nose and them tweaking some characters a little bit and changing what happens. The fundamentals of the show have not been changed. It is literally for constraint reasons, for whatever reasons, or slightly poor execution reasons, whatever the reasons may be. It is an adaptation that is not quite there, as you say, very similar to Harry Potter. But the fundamentals are there. They've not done what Scott Pilgrim Takes Off did. You know what I mean?
But I mean, if you wanted to point at an adaptation of a property where it doesn't really feel like people genuinely feels like no one cared and they really got it wrong and it was actually like so bad you just kind of want to forget it exists. Hey, that happens to exist for this franchise. It's called The Last Airbender movie, and it was directed by M. Night Shyamalan. In a world where that movie exists, the idea that anyone has walked away from this show and gone, oh, it's ruined Avatar. Are you fucking kidding me? Have you slogged through that movie recently? Jesus. Yeah, for sure. So look, the show's not brilliant. Like, it's not a masterpiece, but it is quite entertaining. I had a good time with it. I don't think it's perfect, but I would say if you're a fan of Avatar, it's worth a shot. And if you kind of enjoy like bouncy fantasy stuff with a sort of, you know, not the same as One Piece. One Piece, as we've already pointed out, was executed way better. But if you're into, if you know, that kind of like light fantasy, you know, with world building and interesting characters with powers and stuff, and, you know, sort of almost Marvel-esque in some ways, I guess. I don't want to be... I know that's a dirty word right now, but, like, you know, a lot of the combat feels... There's whiffs of that in the air. You can't not be inspired by what Marvel have done. They changed the landscape of films across a decade. You know, if any of that sounds fun to you, you know, a few quips, some characters on a big adventure... and you've never seen Avatar, I mean, if you're listening to this on Nothing But Static, that is, obviously, if you're listening to this on Analysing Avatar, you already know the show, so this isn't for you. You can just zone out for a second. If you're listening to this on Nothing But Static and you're not sure if this show is worth your time, I would say give it a go. Because you may find there's something to enjoy there. I think so. It's an interesting world, no matter how well it's being explored. So that's my that's Dan's final non-spoilery thought before we do a bit of nitty-gritty. Not too much nitty-gritty, but I've got some nitty-gritty stuff I want to talk about. Have you got any other overall thoughts before we go a bit spoilery?
Nah, let's go spoilers, Dan. We're going full spoilers.
Okay,
in 3, 2,
he's doing a
1.
That's exciting.
Cabbage Man's here, baby.
Oh,
I'm in.
can I tell you?
I'll give a fuck. You've given me a
I loved the execution of that. We've talked about things that haven't been executed as well as I might have personally liked. You know, things that maybe didn't quite land as well as they did in the original show or whatever. Let me tell you, denying us the catchphrase twice before then giving it us, Nadia and I literally got out of our seats and clapped and cheered.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
It was so good. They really earned that. What fun. What a delightful, playful thing to do with the fans. And again, but it's okay. No, they didn't care, Chris. They've never even watched Avatar. They just, looked at a DVD cover and made a show. Piss me off when people say shit like that. Even fucking M. Night Shyamalan went and watched, all 20 episodes of the original series and, wrote a script that featured every single plot line from the original series that was, 20 hours long or something stupid before the studio made him cut it down. And that movie was a mess. The idea that anyone will assume the intentions of the writers breaks my brain. Oh, anyway, yeah, Cabbage Man's there. It's very good. I enjoy it.
What do you think of that whole episode? Because that episode is really the first point of the minute you're like, I think that guy's Jet.
And he's not in we're not seeing him elsewhere. He's literally he's Hinomashu, as is the cave, and as is the bard guys doing the secret tunnel song.
The tunnel song really, really got me because I was like, "This isn't even this season. This is." And again, how can you say people didn't care? It's like they've got the tunnel songs. What the fuck?
They worked lore from Korra into this show.
Mm.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. The Fog of Lost Souls is a concept introduced in Korra, not in the original Avatar. Correct?
Yeah, think so. Yeah.
That's here. These people fucking gave a shit. There's so much stuff referencing the Kyoshi books and the content of the Kyoshi books. Not even stuff we learned in the original show. These people did their fucking homework. Now, you may disagree with the choices. Let's talk about some of the choices. I'll tell you, I thought they cocked up pretty much minute one, though. I thought they made a massive, massive, massive mistake doing the flashbacks. I'm sorry. You're attempting accessibility by explaining the backstory immediately. I get that. But when you think about One Piece opening up with just Luffy on his adventure, and we'll just learn how he got there at a later date. We still don't know. Season 1 is finished. We still don't 100% know Luffy's backstory. We know a bit. We've seen snippets. We know where he got his, gum powers from and all that jazz. But, we still don't 100% know what led him to being in that boat at the start of that episode, wanting to be a pirate. Well, we know why he was a pirate, but you know what I mean? We learned that across the season. The show trusted the audience to just jump on board with the adventure. This show slogs for about 20 minutes of Game of Thrones-esque exposition and backstory and setting up stuff. And I'm like, if you're a casual person that's just gone, I don't know much about this, I'm going to check it out. What a great way to tune out your audience. In an attempt to make the show more accessible, they have made it way more impenetrable. It is very backwards, and it has the exact opposite effect to the one I think they intended. Because I can see the thinking. They went, if they know the backstory first, it'll be easier then for them to jump in with the adventure because they already know what Aang's origins are. They know how we got there. It's not just, why is this boy in an iceberg? Why can't that be the first thing we see, though? Why can't we learn that later? I don't understand why we needed.
I think part of the problem, because I didn't mind it too much, and I understood their thinking behind it.
Yes.
But I think part of the problem is, and I know it sounds stupid, but I don't keep the fact that he's been in there for hundreds of years as a twist, because what happens is, where it doesn't say 100 years later, when people are then making references to the war and the Fire Nation taking over, you're like, I thought they were in the planning stages of that. I thought they were going to do this sort of this whole thing. Like, I know the Earth Kingdom, obviously, we've seen get attacked, and that's brilliant, by the way. Seeing that and the power of that is phenomenal. But I just think like it was just bizarre to then not go, oh, by the way, guys, this is the future. Don't worry about it. Yeah,
mad. So yeah, I thought that was a really big misstep pretty much immediately, and I'll be honest with you, that worries me more than anything else that came up in the rest of the show. Because that episode you talked about, where they sort of like, it's episodes 3 and 4, where they basically take like 4 or 5 episodes of the show and mush them together, and honestly, on paper, if you'd have told me they were going to do that, I'd have been like, you're fucking kidding me. That's horrendous. But I'll be honest with you, it's actually one of the things I thought they executed quite well. I think it makes perfect sense to blend the Jet story with the Machinist story. No?
I've got one nitpick on it, which is we never go back to the Machinist's son. So the Machinist does the right thing in the end.
Yes.
But the last scene we have with his son is his son being disappointed in him.
Right.
And so I think point.
Yeah, because Aang, Sokka, and Katara get the moment where they're up on the thing with Boomy looking over the city, and the Machinist turns up and he gives the knowing nod like, I did the right thing. And it's like, oh, good. Like, I felt, as an audience member, I felt catharsis to that, but you're right. You never get the moment where the son realizes it. I guess, we know those characters come back because they end up helping in the war effort in season 2. So I guess we'll get that at some point, but you're right. This episode it spent a lot of time establishing that relationship between the son and the Machinist, and we didn't get the conclusion.
Yeah, so
that's fair.
There's some nitpicks of it, but the notion that basically, because like what they did, because I'm with you, I really liked that episode.
Yeah, me too.
And because what they did was, and again, it's more thought than some people are giving them credit for. Whilst Jet is in a different place, the fundamentals of the story, Jet wants to do something that is bad because in his head that is a move to help the wider effort. Jet's story is the same.
Yeah, because his plan is still going to kill Fire Nation people and Earth Kingdom citizens at the same time.
Yeah.
Because his plan in the original show was he's going to flood this town because it was full of Fire Nation people. That town also happened to be full of Earth Nation people, Earth Kingdom people, I should say. And the moral thing was, you might get a victory for the war and maybe for the greater good, but at what cost? Have you not stooped to the Fire Nation's level by flattening the whole place? In this, he's going to set off a bomb in Ba Sing Se that would theoretically kill Fire Nation spies, but also a bunch of Earth Kingdom people. So the plot is identical. Yeah. Now, is it executed as well? No. His character is all the stuff I talked about earlier. He explains how he feels in a very on-the-nose manner. It's not the smoothest arc. It doesn't do that brilliant thing the show did where it sort of like neatly folds the character work into the story in a way that feels way more natural. It's definitely very on the nose. And again, that could be a massive barrier for you. If you're listening to this podcast and you hated this show, that is a very, very valid reason to have not enjoyed the show. 100%. It wasn't enough to turn me off, but it is 100% a very valid reason to not like the show. Massively. The execution on those ideas, never 100% smooth sailing. It's worth noting. But the actual core choice is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think there's more valid concerns about the cave. I think people had problems with the cave because obviously the cave was used in the original show to demonstrate Aang and Katara's relationship, and here they're separate because of the way that 7 stories are happening at once. Therefore, they don't get to have that moment that sort of is the first big hint that that's going to go romantic as a plot. I understand that. I understand missing that beat. And I think that's, again, a fair criticism of one of the choices. But let's not pretend no one gave a shit here. They made that choice because they were trying to make sure they got, almost to a fault, as much of the original show into this 8 episodes as they could. Right? And that, failing or not, in your opinion, very admirable attempt, I think. And I think, in terms of just, like, plot structure, at least for episodes 3 and 4, I thought it worked really well. Now, I'm only halfway through the sort of next 2 episodes that seem to combine about 4 episodes of the original series, which is 5 and 6. So 5 and 6, so 3 and 4 seem to go together, and 5 and 6 seem to go together. That's the vibe I've picked up, and then I guess 7 and 8 go together. They sort of happen in twos.
7 and 8 go together as well.
Right, great, yeah, perfect. So I'm in a position where I've only seen half of that one. Now, I thought it was a bumpier effort to mix in the plots that they chose on that one, but I've not seen the conclusion yet, so I can't say that with certainty, because maybe in 6 they sort of weave it together neater. But in episode 5, I sense them doing the same thing they tried in 3 and 4, where it's like 4 or 5 plots from the show, and they've sort of tried to weave them all together. So we've got Ko the Face Stealer, we've got like I always forget the name of that bear spirit that's sad that its forest has been burnt down, as well as Aang going to the Crescent Island to finally talk to Roku, which he hasn't done in this point in the series. We'll talk about that change in a minute, because that's a really interesting change. And I think like that's like super like clunky for me, those plots coming together. That doesn't work as seamlessly as they bring the plots together in 3 and 4. But again, I haven't seen how they conclude that yet, so maybe they tie it together in a nice bow in episode 6. I don't know if you can speak to that, Chris, because you've seen 6 and 7. So
yeah, I want to avoid saying too much, but I think the smoothness in the storytelling in general, I think, as you've said, is beginning to feel the more and more pieces they're putting on the board, the more you then don't get enough attention with certain pieces. Like in the cartoon. Well, actually, I'm going to say this, but we're not going to talk about it. We're going to loop back to something else that's more relevant to what we were just talking about. But I want to say it to make sure we loop back to it. I'm not sure how much Zhao feels like the villain in this series, when in series 1 of the cartoon, he absolutely felt like the villain. Let's come back to that in a sec. In terms of what you were just saying about the spirit world, what did you think of the decision to put Sokka and Katara in the spirit world? Because that did blow my mind apart. I was like, oh fucking hell, this is not your mum's avatar.
Yeah, this ain't your daddy's avatar. No, it's not. I thought that was a really interesting choice, because I was like, wait, what? Why? But I thought like so this is the other thing about this show as well. Every time they make a change, 9 times out of 10, whether it's good or bad, or whether I liked it or I didn't, I can always see the reason for it. And I think that choice is to allow us to get Sokka and Katara's backstories in as natural a way as possible. Because when they get lost in the fog of lost souls, or the sea of lost souls, whatever you want to call it, they are reliving key moments from their lives. And that's the episode. Episode 5 is the one where we get sort of Sokka and Katara's backstory, the tragedy of the situation with her mother. Which I thought they nailed that, by the way. Like, I've got to tell you, that scene with Katara under the thing and her mum, being confronted by the Fire Nation guy, I thought everything about that scene worked for me. I liked that scene an awful lot. I thought it was really well done. I felt all the stuff they needed me to feel. I understood Katara better for it. 'Cause that's another thing as well, when you get these criticisms that are like, Sokka wouldn't say that. No, this Sokka would, though. This isn't the same character. This is a different adaptation of the thing. Yeah. Oh, their powers shouldn't work like that. Yeah, but they do in this, because this is a different adaptation. That's not a valid criticism of this thing as a unit. It might be a reason you prefer the other one, but it's not necessarily a criticism of this thing, unless you can tell me why it didn't work. right? People are mad that Aang is basically flying in the first episode, but in this show he can do that. That's the choice they've made. Let's not pretend they didn't actively make that choice. They didn't misunderstand the show. They went, we think it'll be easier to demonstrate the power of an airbender by showing them being able to fly through the air. It makes sense with the power. Air isn't as easy to depict as flames being shot at people, right? It's making them floaty and being able to jump around and making them acrobatic in that way gave them a visual representation of Aang's power set from the off.
The only one of that I assume people might have said, and I've not seen anyone say this, but I assume they might have said, the only one like that where it's like, well, this is different, that I think actually is a valid kind of
Well, if you can back it up for how it hurts this show, then that's a different matter. If the criticism is just it's different, I'm like, but if it hurts this show, then I'm with you.
Well, I think it hurts the show ultimately because it's going to be, because how do you frame it any differently? Which is for me is the fact that there's not a whole lot of Katara teaching Aang how to waterbend.
Yeah, this is a big one.
So very intrinsic to the show is, and it's because it's so intrinsic to the show. Book 1 is water, and the point is he needs to master all these elements.
Yeah.
We've not seen him trying to master waterbending at all in this. So unless this show is going to be 5 seasons long, and it's not going to be book 1 he learns water, book 2 earth, book 3 fire, fine. That's fine if that's the choice, and I guess we don't really know that yet.
Yep.
But from the point of view of, well, I think it's so core to the show, like that is a change where I think it does harm this show if they're about to turn around and try and make that the framing of the show.
No, I would agree, because the whole thing that they've avoided is clarifying. And this is one thing from the first episode. I was like, why don't they just say this one sentence? Which is, obviously, in the show, the premise is normal avatars, not wartime avatars, get to grow up as normal in their nations until about 16. And then they get to go travel the world learning their other elements and growing into being an avatar. Aang's situation and several other avatars that grew up in more turbulent times had different versions of this story. Kyoshi's version of this story is significantly different to the standard avatar journey, whereas maybe Kuruk or even Korra got a pretty standard version of that, that journey. What they didn't say in the first episode, which baffled me, was war's coming, we need you to be learning earlier because you need to learn, you need to master water, fire, and earth. And they never put it in that simple term, just that sentence. So because they never said you need to be learning water, but then Katara hints at it, no, you need to master the elements, like a few episodes in, like she's learning water and she's like, why don't you learn with me? And he's like, I don't know, Monkey Yatso taught me, and I'm kind of sad. They kind of chose to give Aang this arc where it's more about choosing to start learning water and other elements. That's what it feels like. I've not seen the last couple episodes yet, so whether they play that or not. And I agree with you. I think that is a mistake, because the outcome of that hurts this show is at some point he's just going to be able to do water without having earned it across a season. Yeah. And I think that does hurt this show, not just because it's different to the original, but I think because ultimately it's going to create a problem where we're either going to have a time skip or whatever, and I'm going to go, oh, we can just waterbend now. Cool, I guess. That doesn't feel earned at all. Whereas having the goal be learning from day one and then slowly across the season showing him getting better and better at it, which is what the anime did, not perfectly. There were a couple of times, particularly in the first season, where we said we don't get any impression he's training in water, and now he can just sort of do it. We had that criticism once or twice across the first season, less so in the second, because they made a lot of like toffs, like get back to training, or we were just training this morning. They did a lot of that, so we knew he was training between episodes. it's a pretty clean story, and I agree that will hurt this show. And to answer your question, I've seen a lot of people criticizing that element of it, and that is absolutely valid.
Okay,
that is a massively valid complaint. I think that should be the core to this series, and the fact that I'm 5 episodes in, and I've still not seen him at Waterbend so much as a drop is insane. There are only 3 episodes left, and he's not so much as made a cup of water float. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
for sure.
Mind-meltingly bad choice. I'll tell you a choice that I had a bump up against. So the water one for
could we just loop so that we don't forget just quickly? Do you agree that Zhao doesn't really feel like the villain?
He doesn't really feel like the villain, but I think they've approached Zhao a bit differently. They've made a bit of a choice with Zhao to make him more just like he's an obstacle for Zuko rather than the villain of the series. Because the villain of the series is they've kind of made it the Fire Lord, who was not really in series 1 of the animation. So it's like, they I think what they've done is there's not enough room for 2 people to feel like big bads, and in the original series they hid the Fire Lord for so long, you needed to replace him with a villainous force. So you had Zhao, who was both at odds with the Avatar and Zuko. Whereas here, you've got a situation where you've got the Fire Lord. Zuko is a good threat for Aang to be physically combating him out in the world. Zhao would feel like a spare part, I think. So I feel like they've made a choice to change it, and I agree it is different. I didn't find that to be a massive problem, and I really like that performance. No. I think casting on this show, by the way, is absolute chef's kiss. Like every single actor, we didn't name him earlier, but Danny Pudi is the casting that we were both very excited about. An easy win for us, but just across the board, even when I didn't know the actor, and I'd never heard of them before, or like I wasn't particularly familiar with them, they were just, every single one of them, I was like, boom, boom, boom. And I know a lot of people have complained about the kid acting. Harry Potter, like, what are you talking about? Like, if you think these kids are doing anything worse than the fucking... oh no, it's Voldemort! You're out of your fucking mind.
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say.
I thought the one I was really like, fucking hell, the acting is great in this. Is like Suki. I thought the actress playing Suki was fantastic.
Where did they find her? I've not looked her up yet. She was amazing.
She was brilliant. It felt like she literally brought the animated character to life. What change? I don't want you to forget it and not loop. What change were you going to talk about then?
So there's a change that I personally was like, oh, well, that's not how they did it in the show, and I preferred the show version, even though it doesn't really hurt this product. The closest I came to that kind of a criticism was when Kyoshi physically took over Aang's body, and I know they do that in the show in season 2. And I didn't care for it then. If you've listened to Analysing Avatar, you know I didn't like it then. I always liked the idea that we, the audience, might get a glimpse of Roku or Kyoshi or Kuruk or Yang Chen through Aang as he used powers that were drawn from them as a visual representation that Aang was them. But when the smoke cleared, I always wanted it to be Aang. I didn't want Aang to be physically shape-shifted into that avatar. I personally don't like that choice. It doesn't sit with my taste for how I like this world to work, but they made that choice, and boy did they did a thing with it. They committed. Let me tell you, seeing Kyoshi badassly land and do a bunch of Kyoshi shit was awesome to see.
Yeah, I thought the scene was phenomenal, and I think even your complaint isn't actually the change. It's not the fact that it's the Kyoshi instead of, I think it was the Waterbender, wasn't it?
I think it was it not
originals?
Roku?
Or maybe it was Roku. So the fact that it's Kyoshi isn't your complaint. Like you say, you didn't like it in the cartoon. Like that's just something you don't like. It's not the specifics of them making it her. I too am not too fond of that as an idea, because also I think it just kind of lessens At the moment, we're for anyone jumping in late, we've seen 3 seasons of Korra, and I don't like being reminded of that because like Aang's gone, and that's part of the pain of it. The notion that Tenzin could see Aang because Korra could, well, obviously she's lost connection to past lives at the time with where we are, but like the notion, I don't know, maybe there's drama potential in there, but I just think it's a bit messy. But like you, so whilst I don't like the idea as a whole, the Kyoshi fight, that was so badass. It was fucking brilliant.
Yeah,
and I really liked that.
And look, here's a criticism I think somebody could have that I didn't feel but would agree with. It does feel a little bit like they've leaned into Kyoshi because they know Kyoshi is a much more popular character than Roku. So if Aang's talking to a past avatar, make it Kyoshi. But just tiny.
It fit, but it also fit in the story they were telling that episode. That episode is about the Kyoshi warriors. If that happened in the middle of, whatever the city's called that they visit in episode
Omashu.
3.
Mm-hmm.
If that happened in Omashu, sure, fine, but it's literally the story is about the Kyoshi warriors.
Yeah.
It's like the blending of Jet and Amashu. They've made it work.
Yeah. And it works within the continuity and the rules of the show, because Aang and several people make the point that like he can only connect to Kyoshi at a Kyoshi like hot spot, like a spiritual spot that's linked to her. So Kyoshi Island is that. Speaking to Roku would require him to go to Crescent Island and do that, which is where he's just where I'm up to in the episodes. In episode 5, that's where he's just gone off to get the answer to how to save Katara and Sokka and Katara from Ko, which I think is a brilliant. Like I mean, I don't know why we needed a new reason for Aang to want to go talk to Roku, because in the original show he just wanted to talk to Roku because he was like, I think he can give me guidance. That's enough, I think. But the show wants to give him a more immediate stakes for needing to go to Crescent Island and speak to Roku, and Roku is the only avatar that, in the world of this show, had defeated or got on the better of Ko, particularly because, as is canon in both the original animation and here, Avatar Korra lost a loved one to Ko, and then maybe he lost his own life to Ko. I think that might be how he ended. I'm not sure. But he certainly lost his loved one to Ko. I can't remember the exact nature of his ending otherwise. But my point being, that's like, they've made it make sense within the world they've created. It might not fit perfectly in the logic of the animated show, but it's its own thing. And as long as it has its own sense of continuity and logic, it works. I found the name of the actress, by the way, Maria Zhang. Who plays Kyoshi, and who, by the way, has the most amazing ability to remove all of her Kyoshi makeup in one wipe perfectly while leaving behind her actual normal makeup. That was very impressive. I want that. That's some magic makeup water removing stuff they got there on Kyoshi Island.
I think the actress playing Katara is doing a brilliant job as well. I think she's really good.
I think the whole cast are doing really well. I think they're all really good.
Yeah.
I like them. I like every one of them. I think they cast it brilliantly. I think the kid playing Sokka's great. The kid playing Aang's doing a great job. I'm on board with this cast. I like them. I think they're fun. I think the Sokka kid's got the goofiness just right. Like the script makes him more serious more often than he probably should be, in my opinion, because I just think the balance of the cast, not just, again, putting aside the original show, in this show, the balance of the cast leans more serious, and I know the show's tone is leaning more serious, but you've just got to be able to offset that, I think. I think making use of Sokka, because, the arc they've got Aang on, he would be being bad at learning to be the Avatar if he was goofing off too much, because this show has very much immediately given him the arc or the story of, I need to be more responsible because I just let everyone down, whereas the show kind of only reveals that later on after he's done episodes of dicking around, and at that point you go, Aang, learn. It's a different arc.
It is interesting though, isn't it? It is interesting, though, isn't it? How that is very much the arc they've given him, and yet they lessened it in the flashback. Because my memory of the original is he's literally running away from his Avatar responsibilities. He literally runs away. In this, he's just going for a ride on Appa to clear his thoughts and gets caught in a storm.
Yeah.
Like there's no indicate. He's not leaving in this. He's literally, oh, you can't sleep either. Yeah, I need to think. Like, I didn't get the vibe that he was as literally running away, as literal running. I don't know how to phrase that grammatically, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think
100%.
he ran away a lot more in the original, and yet the rest of the show has really hounded in on that.
Yeah, and I mean they made a lot of changes
then.
to like Boomy and Boomy's feelings towards Aang, and made him a lot more antagonistic towards Aang and more frustrated at Aang's abandonment, which I think is fine. I think that's also a smart choice because even though that's not Boomy as I know Boomy, this version of Boomy and Netflix live action Boomy, he's got a real gripe with Aang, and I think a fair one, and that is, and he is the voice for a world annoyed at Aang. You know,
I'm absolutely fine with that. I just thought the resolution was rushed. Here's a thing you gave me. Rushed. Oh yeah, we are friends. Okay. Well, you've resolved that plot very quickly, haven't you?
Yeah, agreed. But this is what I'm saying. Like a lot of these core ideas are absolutely fine. I think the issue is often in the execution, whether it be a bit rushed,
the Boomy,
or like not as clean as it could be.
The Boomy fight, spectacular. The same gravitas of like the muscles and stuff as the original. I thought it was the Boomy fight was brilliant. Yeah. What do you think of Fire Lord and Azula being introduced so early?
Yeah, I think fine. I think because in this, we don't have as many Zuko is off doing his thing separate from Avatar plots as we did because he's with Aang a lot in this show. Like I think most episodes he's literally been with Aang, whereas in the animated show, which is across 20 episodes, obviously Zuko will bump into Aang for one episode, but then they might not see each other for 3 or 4, right? So the B plot that's like, what are the villains up to, would always be what Zuko was doing. But because Zuko is so hot on Aang's tail in this show, in the episodes where they're literally fighting each other, what are you cutting to break it up?
Yeah.
Well, the villain, the Fire Lord. Why not? Why not set up the menacing Fire Lord and Azula earlier on? You know those characters exist. Yeah, I think it's fine. It maybe not introducing them would have given you more space to tell some of the other stories better, put a bit more time into them. I really feel like the dialogue in this show is one of its worst elements, and I really feel like someone needed to punch up the dialogue in all of these scripts. If someone had just given me, I'm not saying I know better than these guys, but like, just give me a couple of hours in these scripts, and this dialogue would be, it wouldn't take much. It's all very clunky and not very subtle, but that's a different thing. It's one of the show's.
Well, the dialogue, just as we said earlier, the dialogue feels like the first draft where you're just getting on the page what you want people to feel, and like so you just write. Oh, I ran away and abandoned everyone, and now I feel guilty about it. And you just write that, and you're gonna work it out. You're gonna come back and make it more subtle later. It feels like they never came back and made it more.
Yeah, because you'd come back and you'd sort of say you'd have him say something like that would hint at that without directly saying it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true.
And if you are going to follow the three season structure, which certainly, you only need to look at the episode titles to go, well, it looks like that's what they're doing, despite the big water-bending thing that we've already talked about, which I have a real issue with. I think if you're going to follow the 3-season structure, and it's 3 seasons of 8 episodes, absolutely introduce the Fire Lord early, like an Azula early, because you're setting them up to be more of a villain.
And sooner.
How do you feel?
They're going to be more relevant sooner. Like you want me to be terrified of the Fire Lord by the time we introduce him. Really, once Aang has to actually think about facing him.
It does have an interesting knock-on effect, having to condense everything and introducing them as like true villains earlier. Does have an interesting knock-on effect where Zuko. Where Zuko's story... Zuko feels less like a villain in this show. And I think it's fine because they have introduced another villain and they are doing the interesting thing of it's not really Aang's fault why he's after him. It's not personal, and he has moments where he makes the choice to save his uncle in the episode as he does in the original. And I think it's interesting that and I can see someone not liking it, but again, I think it's an example of, well, this is just the show's version of that. But I think it is interesting that basically when you condense Zuko's story down, you inherently make him less of the antagonist and less of the villain, which is again why it's very clever to have the Fire Lord in here at this stage, because it's like, well, that's the actual villain, and this is a fucked up child who is trying to appease a father that doesn't give a fuck.
And they do a really interesting thing in this show as well, which is put Aang with Iroh multiple times where they didn't really speak in the show, and I think because I heard someone say the other day, oh, this show doesn't care as much about this idea that not everyone in the Fire Nation is about, that idea that we praise the original show of, which is the people of a nation are not their leaders, right? And I think some people have criticized this show for some of its like there's a line early in one of the episodes where one character says something like, they're firebenders, not their Fire Nation army, or like something like that, meaning that person, that character, was immediately assuming they were bad because they were firebenders. But here's the thing, that's the premise. The plot is that people are paranoid and are wrong to feel immediate negativity towards people who just because they happen to be from the Fire Nation. They are wrong to feel that way, and the show does an awful lot to demonstrate, I think, that core idea of the Fire Lord isn't great, but other people from that nation are redeemable. I mean, they go on.
They have the character. They have Iroh, obviously. They have Zuko, who's grey, not black and white, and they literally have a firebender help Aang when he goes to speak to Roku, whoever the fire avatar is. Roku, the fire avatar, isn't it?
Roku, yeah.
Roku, yeah. There's a firebender that helps him. He's like, I'm on your side. So yeah. I think they do enough to show that.
Yeah, it was a weird criticism.
They have also.
I think the show has got it. I think the show understands that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and you have Aang talking about how he was friends with the different nations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's that moment with him and Iroh where he's like, why did the Fire Nation do this? And Iroh sort of explains the logic. But you sort of, because that actor is an absolute genius working with absolutely terrible dialogue, he manages to deliver the explanation in a way where he doesn't believe it. Do you know what I mean? It's really well done.
You've hit on an interesting point there, where actually I think a lot of people are giving the child actors grief for actually just the poor dialogue. Because when you've got Daniel Day Kim delivering shit dialogue, it's still Daniel Day Kim. Yeah. He's still got the decades worth of experience and all that stuff to make that work. I really don't think the actors. I don't think any of the actors are the problem here. No. I think the clunky, and it's specifically with Aang. I think Aang's been given the worst kind of "I'm going to say my feelings" dialogue in the whole show, and I just think it's unfair that actually the actors are bearing the burden of that. Because you're absolutely right. The dialogue in that scene is awful all round. But the actor playing Iroh is able to pull it off, and you cannot fault someone who is, people who have been doing it for years as opposed to decades for not being able to do that. I'm sorry, you know what I mean.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%. Very quickly, can we talk about my hilariously least favorite moment in the entire show, though? Because it was just so absurd.
Go for it.
So. Setup is Iroh and Zuko have not told Zhao that they're chasing after the Avatar, and the next morning they're wandering They're wandering through the through the shipyard, and they notice Zhao's ship is gone. This is what happens. I've got the audio because I ripped this audio particularly for this moment, Chris, because this is fucking incredible. Hopefully you can hear it too. But here we go. This is what happens. So Zuko questions where Zhao's ship is, and then this random guy just sidles up. Here.
Zhao's boat. It's gone.
Zhao? He heard something about a flying cow near Kyoshi Island, so he set sail at dawn.
What was that random helpful man that's appeared out of nowhere, said one sentence, and then left forever? What did you say?
Zhao? He heard something about a flying cow near Kyoshi Island, so he set sail at dawn.
Oh, so apparently Zhao heard something about a flying cow near Kyoshi Island, and he set sail at dawn.
Especially
the guy sidles into the scene, dumps that information, and walks away.
There is no reason at all that dialogue couldn't have come from one of the crews on the ship. Because they've already established that the crews mix with each other and the two ships like hang out together. So just give that dialogue to one of them.
Why couldn't we have had a scene? And this smacks of they wrote it once and meant to come back to it to make it a bit less clunky. Like they wrote it like that as the first draft, like, yeah, okay, he gets the exposition. We'll write that scene smoother later. You'd go back maybe at a later date and go, okay, so we don't want a random person to walk up and drop that information. So Zuko goes, his ship's gone. Get me my ensign or whatever, and then they bring one of these guys. You spoke to the people from that ship. What happened? And he gives him the information because he's asking for it. Not just fucking the guy that comes in. Like, you'd find a dramatic way to do it where, like, you also want to maybe say something about Zuko's relationship with his crew, which I know they hit on in later episodes of this beyond what I've seen, because I saw a comment about it on one of the threads. Use it as a moment to establish more about his relationship with his crew, like, by getting that information out of them. Yeah. Not just some fucking convenient information man just saying one of the most awkward lines of dialogue I've ever heard in my life. Let's hear it again. It's so good.
Zhao? He heard something about a flying cow near Kyoshi Island, so he set sail at dawn.
And it's delivered so bad. He heard something about a flying cow near Kyoshi Island, so he set sail at dawn. Like, I might call this episode Nothing But Static. He set sail at dawn. Fuck it. I might call it. He heard something about a flying cow near Kyoshi Island, and he set sail at dawn.
You should absolutely call it that. Absolutely, you should. Speaking of the crew, the notion that the crew is the crew he saved from getting sacrificed. Is that from the original show?
No, that's new. I don't know what the nature of that yet, because that's not in an episode I've seen. But people have talked about it.
Oh shit!
Sorry,
dude.
Fine.
Oh,
it's absolutely fine.
Sorry,
but no, it's fine. Because I knew there was something going on with the crew, because a lot of people had commented that was a really good element of it. I don't believe that's in the original show. I think that's something they've added for this.
Oh, sorry, mate. It's great. They're right. It's a brilliant element.
Yeah.
It's a really great idea. Apologies.
No, it's fine. I got a hint that there was something going on there, so it's not as big of a spoiler as you might think. But yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And look, I will say this as well. Like, if you watched the first episode of this and hated it and went away, I will say I think episodes 3 and 4 are significantly better than episodes 1 and 2, because there's a lot less trying to make it make sense for newbies in a way that doesn't really actually help the show be fun. Once it's free of like making its premise clearer, I would say episodes 3 and 4 are a lot more enjoyable than episodes 1 and 2. That's just my opinion there.
Yeah, I think it's certain elements get a little bit clunky after that as well, as you indicated with even the point you're at. But I just think it's just like I say, I can't speak to how enjoyable this show is if you don't have nostalgia or haven't watched the original, and I would be fascinated to. I almost want to sit Jess down to watch it, but I don't know if she'll, you know what I mean. She by osmosis she'll very much know it's like, you know what I mean. I can't trick her. She'll know it's a remake of the cartoon we watch. But I can't. So I can't speak to that. But if you're a fan of Avatar, there's absolutely enjoyment to be had here. I think it's a lot of fun. It's I was excited to watch it, but if it was shit, it'd have been a chore to have watched the rest. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching this show. Yeah. And some decisions, like we said in the kind of non-spoiler summary, some decisions, bit odd, but actually, on the whole, I think there's a lot of fun to be had here, and I think they've made some very clever changes.
Yeah, is this going to be winning statics? Probably not. Is this one of the better shows we see this year? No, I don't think so. I think Monarch: Legacy of Monsters is probably more fun than this and better executed than this. Just an example from recent history that's immediately popped to mind as a sort of pulpy show with a lot of mythology that I enjoyed. One Piece is significantly better than this, but that's not the question. The question is this good? Like, should you watch this? Is this a recommend? I think so. I liked this show. I enjoyed this show. When we finish recording this, I'm probably going to sit down with Nadia and watch another episode of this show. I liked it. I didn't love it because, as I said at the beginning, it is a bastion of missed potential. And I empathize with that. If your frustration is not so much that you didn't care for this show, is that it could have been so much better. And it was very close. They got so... That's, I think, maybe one of the reasons I think we're seeing a lot of like people who aren't just disappointed, but like angry. And I don't want to speak for anyone ever, but like I wouldn't be surprised to discover that a lot of those people actually, the disappointment is there are so many things that are working here. The ones that don't really fuck it. And it's so close to being the thing that people want in a good adaptation of this show. But it's then let down in like weird, clunky execution of certain story elements, character arcs that feel a bit uneven, the dialogue, which isn't always great and is heavy on exposition. All of those problems are 100% a big issue, and prevent it from being great. It is just good, and that's fine for me. I'll be honest with you, good is a step up what I went into it thinking it was going to be. So I got a little excited as we got closer to it. Like there was a clip they released a few days before that I went, okay, I think I might be in. It's the Sky Bison clip from the first episode, which they released, where like it's like repeating it doesn't help. Sky Bison, that, which I found quite funny and was a good interaction between Sokka and Aang that I thought really represented their relationship. So I saw that clip and went, oh, fun. Okay, this feels like they understand the world at least and the characters. Not perfect at all, not a masterpiece at all, but for 8 episodes, quite enjoyable. Will we come back to it? Probably, because we do a podcast specifically on Avatar, and we have only got 1 season of Korra left. So maybe we'll come back and break it down episode by episode at some point, which will be fun, I think. But I will say as well, obviously, there's the big rumor that came out of the weekend. Last weekend was that the rumor is there's an animated feature length Avatar thing coming out late this year. That is rumoured to be Aang, Katara, Toph, Sokka in their late 20s, early 30s, and a story set around then. If that's the plan...
absolutely here for.
Yeah, exactly. It was just what I was going to say. If that's the plan, I'm in. But we'll see. Who knows whether that is real or will be good. But if you're asking me the simple question of, was The Last Airbender TV show alright? Yeah, it's pretty good. I enjoyed it so far. I've still got a couple episodes to watch, so I'm not the perfect person to ask, but in terms of first impressions, I'm enjoying it. And Chris, who is only 1 episode from the end, I'm guessing that's where you're at too.
Yeah, absolutely, completely where I'm at. I think I had a lot. I wouldn't have watched 5 episodes in one sitting if it wasn't enjoyable. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's pretty harmless. I will say that as well. Like, it's like, it's pretty inoffensive. Like I struggle to understand the people who are really angry about this show, but you know, whatever. With that said, thank you everyone who's leaving here because you're listening to this on the Analysing Avatar feed.
Chow? He heard something about a flying cow near Kyoshi Island, so he set sail at dawn.